Okay, let me just move that out of the way. Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you to our joining our first practitioner forum best practice sessions. Today's kind of sort of setting the scene for the ones that we're going to be doing in the future, but we're going to do a focus on request management and cover off a few topics around this. As Tony said, I've got quite a lot of content to go through, so we'll probably be using the entire hour, and you'll have to tell me to speed up if we need to as well. Okay, so about these sessions, so the agenda. So we're going to do a quick overview of the sessions. Then we're going to do a focus on request management. Then we're going to go through some configuration use cases. So we're going to look at some configuration that has been done out by customers and how potentially you could use those. And then we'll do a little bit of a wrap up and get some feedback and see where we're going forward. Okay, so these best practice sessions really is about providing guidance on what comes with the out-of-the-box processes and tool capability of SMAX. Obviously, what we have today is based on the November release, so that came out at the end of last year, and obviously we'll be updating these based on new features and functionalities that come as the tool progresses over time. We also want to make sure that we get a common understanding between us on some of the principles and terminology that we're using. So when I mention a particular record type, that you understand that. Same goes for when we talk about walking around things like the administration or talk about REST APIs, etc. And the key thing really with these sessions is to try to help you as customers to get the most out of the suite and think about ways in how you can extend beyond the out-of-the-box capabilities to fit with your business requirements. And the key thing with that as well is we want to share not only the use cases that we come across where we talk with customers in the roles that we have, but also your use cases, some of the things that you've done with your implementations. We're really keen to sort of you to share those with us so we can then share them back out with everyone else. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on towards the end of the session. Okay. So let's do a focus on request management, and because obviously this is the first one, I'm kind of going to go in a little bit lower level detail around request management, just to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page. So when we talk about request records, we're talking about the service request management module within SMAX, and also obviously what exists in Service Anywhere. And as part of that, there's four main types of request records that exist today. So we have our IT service request, our IT support request, HR support, and our cart request. And I'll go into the details of those four as we go forward. Now, just a note really on this. Obviously, we talk about the suite now being known as SMAX, and not IT SMAX, as it was a previous branding of our suite. And what we found as well with a lot of customers is when they're actually implementing and using the request management module, they tend to modify the labels for the different record types, specifically removing the IT from service and support request. So I'm quite used to calling them just service and support requests. So if you'll forgive me for not saying IT service or IT support every time. Okay, so our first ones are obviously our IT service requests. And these are where you've got a request that comes in from an end user, which is predefined, the standard set of activities that are within your organization and how they're delivered. And they're all about providing something to the customer, so the end user. So this is all about things like increasing the size of the mailbox. They're leaving the organization. Maybe there's a leaver process that needs to be done. Or it could be asking for more memory in a virtual machine, maybe for a developer, that kind of thing. One of the key things to note as well is that service request records, they can only be raised from the catalog. So you have to have a valid offering in your catalog for it to be raised as a service request type. And we'll talk more about the catalog in a later session, getting more deep dive into that. But that's just something to make you aware of at this point. On the other hand, we then have our IT support requests. And those cover what would tend to be the things where they're not necessarily predefined. They could be, maybe in how the support is handled, but it's not necessarily expected as a reason why someone will be contacting the service desk. It may be that they've got an issue, they can't access their email. They may be unhappy with support, and raising a complaint. Or maybe even hopefully saying how well the service desk is, or how amazing the service portal is, and how easy it is to use. And likewise with those, it's supporting the incident management process, and we'll talk a little bit more about incident versus request in a short while. The other thing to note is out of the box, if someone goes to the service portal and raises a request without selecting an offering from the catalogue, that generic request will be an IT support request. It will always default to being that. And one of our use cases we talk later on kind of tucks into something around that capability. Okay, then we've got our third type, which are cart requests. So cart requests are a very specific type of request. Excuse me, and they're really when you set up and utilise the shopping cart functionality within SMAX, and that's where, in the classic sense, is the user goes into the system and they decide they're going to, order a new laptop, maybe order a mobile phone, ask for extra memory, maybe raise several individual requests, but actually submit them as one. So in that kind of situation, we create a cart request to act as a parent wrapper around all those to bundle them together, so that they can be managed through. You can turn shopping cart functionality off the self-service portal feature settings, and it really is going to come down to obviously what works within your business and how you want to handle that, and whether you want to have carts enabled. One advantage that cart requests do have, which can be useful, is you can have an extra level of approval as part of that. So it's an approval that would apply all times. It's actually defined in the record administration, whereas obviously with IT service requests, you would define that potentially against the individual offering. So be aware that that's going to apply to all types of cart requests that come through, no matter how they're bundled together. Okay. And finally, the fourth type that we have today out of the box is HR requests. So this was an additional workflow that was created where there's no approval and there's no sort of end user acceptance, and I'll go through the workflows a bit later on. But the idea is to kind of a streamlined process flow that could be used specifically for people that are companies that are using SMAX for non-IT functionality, and maybe don't need some of the features that we'd see in the other request types. Again, it gives you an extra workflow that you can use, which can be configured and managed separately. And again, you can create catalog items that run against this particular request type. From experience I've had with some of our customers, I think because maybe where they were with Service Anywhere and how that was developed, a lot of customers tend to hook and use the service request and the support request models primarily for a lot of their HR requests, and use this workflow for where there's some certain edge cases where they need to do things slightly differently, and maybe track it in a slightly different way. But it's about giving you the flexibility to do that in what works for you and your organisation. Okay. Just to touch on our service request management and incident management and how that fits with our request records. So if we think about request records first, there's some quite key points really when we think about the incident management process. So request records are always raised against an end user. There's always an end user that's starting that, be that from the self-service portal for email, or maybe contacting the service desk, who obviously would then potentially use the live support function within SMAX to raise that ticket. And that request record, as we said before, that could be something that's going to be handled by that agent on the service desk. It may go to a second line team, but it's primarily trying to help solve the user's individual issue that they appear to have at that point. That said, it may be escalated or related to an existing incident that's in the system. So if we look at those incidents, and when we talk about incident records in SMAX, we focus on the fact that the incident records are raised against a service or an element within the business. So we're thinking about it at that higher level, about the fact that it's quite likely going to be raised because maybe we've seen an outage. A system has gone down, maybe performance is slow, that kind of thing. It may have been flagged by an event monitoring tool, and a common use case, obviously, for customers is to have an event monitoring to automatically generate incident records. Or it may be that an agent, second line or third line agent, they look at all the request tickets that have come in and say, actually, we look like we've got a common problem here. So actually what we need to do is raise an incident record, relate those requests to that incident record for us to then track and move them forward. So we can drive them to what needs to be done. So that's at a high level. And just to kind of give a bit more information, we've actually put a bit more information in our Getting Started guide PDF that's available from our SMAX Learn. And we actually also have a blog post, and I've got a link in the presentation which we'll make sure we'll have available after the sessions to go and have a read on that topic as well. So just to kind of give you some examples, maybe to try and help cement it for yourself. So if we take a simple example, users got their password for the SAP application. Obviously, it's coming from an end user perspective. They're going to raise an IT service request because it's a password. We could have another debate about service versus support when it comes to password, but in the case where the end user is asking to have their password reset, we would normally treat that as a part of the service request management process and as a service request. Through maybe REST APIs or operations orchestration and workflows, we can have it all pre-built so it goes and does, when they raise that ticket, goes and performs the action that's needed and maybe emails the user with their new password. Another example we've got here is user can't connect to the SAP application itself. Investigation by an agent, so maybe second line, is that it's an improper proxy definition on any user machine. Again, with this one, it's going to stay within the request record type because it's an IT, in this case, it's an IT support request. It's been raised, it's just the user. We don't have an outage against the service. Although it is the service is affected for that user, it's just them individually, not affected anyone else. And therefore, it's not caused by the service provider either. Okay. We then take a next one. So event management detects that one of our servers in the SAP application is crashed. Redundant systems keep the application alive, but users are taking longer than normal to log in. In this case, we're in pure incident management world. Okay, so either this is something that the event monitoring system would generate the incident record, or maybe an agent that's looking at the event management system would manually raise that ticket in that case. And obviously, although the service is still available, it's degraded. So therefore, we want to have that incident record to track it until we restore service correctly. Our final example is the user calls in reporting they're taking a long time to log into the SAP application. Well, that one, because it's an end user, again, it's going to be raised as an IT support request, but we're going to link it to that above incident management record, assuming these all happened at a similar time, because obviously, as was identified in the incident record, that's the reason and the underlying reason why we're getting that slower time. But but we still got that tracking for the end user that they've raised that support record. Now, of course, when we think about ways of working and the way individual end users are, it may be a case that when they phone the service desk and the service desk is aware of this incident, because they've seen it come up as part of live support as a suggested incident for the user's issue. It may be that the end user is quite happy with that and happy to just have it as a closed ticket because they've been notified. But it might also be that they would like that request record left open related to the incident so that they can be notified when the incident is completed. And of course, with the way the system is set up, once that incident is resolved, that would move that request to resolved and notify the end user of the appropriate solution that was applied. Okay, so let's go through the various workflows. So first I want to just do a high-level overview of the service request workflow. So within the tool, we have our concept of the large metaphases. Not the most easily rememberable name, but you'll soon get used to it. And those are obviously our blue bands that we see going down the page. So classification, approval, fulfillment, validation, and done. And those are obviously one area where you can potentially run business rules against a record. And those bands are the same irrespective of the different request workflows that you've got. So rules against those can apply globally across all of those. Underneath that, we have our individual phases for the service request workflow. So here we have log, we have an approval, the fulfillment phase where the work's done, and normally there's task plans associated with that, and then we have our validation and closure. The validation you'll see is very similar in support request, and that's about basically saying we've got a resolution, we're going to pass it back to the end user and get them to it whether they accept that the work has been completed, and if so, we can close the ticket off. Support requests, slightly different because we don't have an approval in a support request. However, in this case, we have a slightly different setup. So we have a classify phase, we have first line support, and we have escalate. And if you look at the blue bands, it's exactly the same blue bands as before, but obviously we don't see the approval one. The validation and the done meta phases, they're exactly the same, because it's the same kind of acceptance process. However, in the fulfillment phase, instead of just a fulfill phase, we've got a first line support and an escalation. Now, we'll probably talk about that in a later session between the two, and what works for you within your organisation about what phase you want records in terms of whether they should be a first line support or in the escalate phase as they go through the various different support teams. But out of the box, they're manual processes that move between those two. HR request workflow, a lot simpler, as you can see. We've got our log and our classify, just like support. We have a process phase during the fulfillment, so again, allows us to do whatever's required for that process. Maybe in a HR world, that could be around job opportunities and the activities that go along that. And then we basically have our standard done of close and abandon based on what happens with the record. Again, the cart request, again running across those meta phases. We've got our log and we've got that approval that we mentioned before, which we could potentially go through, and we have our close. And what would happen with the cart is obviously once it goes through that life cycle, that allows then any of the child requests that are sitting under it, which in most cases will probably be service requests or maybe HR requests. They'll then kick off their workflow and start running at that point. Obviously, if you decide to put a governance level approval in, they won't start until that approval at this level is complete. Okay, I just want to come back to service requests and support requests and just kind of show you some of the automation that we've got built into the system. And certainly for some users, this can be takes a little while having to do anything to it. So here's our high-level workflow. Now let's look into a bit of detail about how those transitions between those phases work. So it's a little bit of a busy slide, but if you look here where we've got little cogs next to the transitions, that's where we're basically saying it's an automation within the tool that's going to move it forward to that next phase. So rather than relying on a service desk agent having to change it from log to approve, or from fulfill to accept or resolve, as you can have with some systems, we naturally assume the system knows that once certain fields have been populated, that we're ready to move on to the next phase. So from the point of view of log going through to the approval or fulfill, it's pretty much based on whether there's approvals associated with that service request as to which of those two routes it will go through. And that's an automated transmission as soon as the record has been saved for the first time. Then, off the back of that, if we look at, let's go through the positive route through, if the approval has been successfully approved on whatever approval plan has been used there, that will drive it into fulfill. There, obviously, we sit in that phase and do whatever works needed. But once the solution has been provided and a completion code has been set on that record, that will move it to the accept phase, where we're basically sending it back to the user, saying that the service request has been completed, and getting them to accept or reject the work that's been done against that request. Out of the box, we have a rule that says it will close after 2 days. So what that means is after 2 physical days, so 48 hours, the ticket will move from accept straight to close, because we'll take it based on an assumption that we know that some end users may not go and accept or reject a ticket, so we auto close those down. If the user goes and accepts again, that will move it to close, and if they reject, it will move it to the review phase. That auto close after 2 days, that's just a standard business rule, and it's quite easy to change that and set that to something that may be more useful for your organisation. Certainly a lot of the customers that I've worked with tend to look at setting this around about maybe 7 days. I had some that set it at 14 days or somewhere in between, to make sure that they've given the end user plenty of time to accept the solution that was provided. The key thing to note is, from a service level management perspective and your SLAs, once it goes into that accept phase, the SLAs, the targets have been, the timing against those, the clock has been stopped. So actually, whilst you're waiting on the end user, you're not going to affect any reporting or service level targets that you've got for there. So actually, having that longer time before you auto close isn't a bad thing, and at least means the end user's got the opportunity to make a comment if they needed to. Okay, so we've looked at service requests. So let's look at support requests and see what the difference is on this one. Actually, there's not much difference on this one. The validation and the done meta phases at the end of the workflow, they work exactly the same. So it's the same business rule that closes after 2 days, which is modify if you want to do. The same if the user accepts the solution or rejects it, it will move to close or to review. Going from the front, we automatically move from log to classify. So as soon as that record is created, we move it into that classify state. And then during the classify state, it's based on a couple of pieces of information as to whether it will move forward to first line support. And that's primarily based on it being assigned to a ticket. But you can have that also as a manual transition should you wish. Then going on from there, first line to support to escalate. That's a manual transition, and potentially you can move back and forth between that. But again, escalate works in a similar way to first line support, in that if it's been marked as the solution and the completion code have been provided, it will move it through to accept. And likewise, if an end user actually goes in and abandons the ticket, it will push it through to abandon if it's in those phases. Okay. Last thing I really wanted to touch on for today's session, because I'm quite conscious of overall how much time we've got, is I just want to touch on some of the key request management forms that are in the system. Unlike a lot of the other modules and apps within SMAX, they have they only normally have about 3 or 4 forms in the system. Request management has a lot more, and that's because if you think about it, you've not only got what the agent sees in terms of managing the ticket and the different tabs that they have there, but we also have what the end user sees. We have what's available to things like the virtual agent, and we also have what's available from live support as well. So we've got obviously a higher number of forms that are in the system. So just to highlight some of probably the key ones that you may look if you're going to create maybe some custom fields and want to add them onto the forms to make you aware of. So the preview request form, that's the one that you'll see on the right pane of a view. So whenever you're looking at a view of tickets, you'll see on the right hand side what fields are there and potentially editable. The default one is used when you're in the catalog and you want to set default values for fields on the request record. So there's a standard small subset on there, but you can easily add extra fields on there rather than having business rules to set some of those fields. Probably the most common one that you'll use is the without resolution form, and that's the one that as an agent, when you're viewing or editing a request in full request detail mode, that's the forms that you see there mainly on obviously the general tab with the main layout. The next 4 are all for the portal, so service requests, support requests, and HR requests. Based on which type you use, they will be the standard form that you would see. But obviously, on top of that, you are also going to see any user options that you set against that offering. And we'll talk about offerings and user options when we come back to do service catalog in another session. The final one there of that set is the general request, which is a standard form when you don't select any offering from the portal. We actually recommend you don't modify that one and leave that one out of the box, because there's actually another form which is called custom, which you can set to be the form that's displayed at that point instead. Via the update that general request form, it means you'll be able to encompass that new features that may come through in that case. The final 2 that I've got listed here are the ones that are used for live support, so the new and the edit requests. And actually, one of my use cases, you'll actually see the difference between those 2 as we go through. So that's really all I wanted to kind of cover on request management as a first dive into request management. We've got obviously further reading available to you. So there's the information that's available within the application help center. So I've put the URLs, and we'll make sure these are obviously accessible from the SMAX Learn portal when we'll upload the presentation. So that's obviously the one that's the current November release one that's on our doc site. We then have our blog post, which was done some time ago around request management versus incident management, and there's some interesting comments there about our approach compared to competitors, which is really good. And then the other thing that I wanted to highlight at this point is our Getting Started guide. So this is a PDF document about getting started with SMAX. It's originally developed against Service Anywhere and has been updated for SMAX. Chapters 5 and 6 cover request management and the workflows, and that's available from the SMAX Learn site. You can go there and download the PDF. It's about 11 meg. It's got some really great information written by one of my colleagues, who I've been able to borrow some of the information from that for this presentation. Okay, so done a lot of talking, and we've talked a lot about request management. So now what I want to do is I want to move on now to our configuration use cases. So this is where we're going to get some the stuff I enjoy rather than the standard process elements. So what we've done is we've decided to break down our configuration use cases into three levels of complexity, so to speak. So we're using the phrase crawl, walk, run to be able to identify those. So one that we consider as a crawl is simple configuration, should be able to set it up in minutes, but it might not actually be suitable for all use case, for all customers, but could be a good starting point for building out a more complex use case, and we'll go through one of those next. Then we've got our walk ones, so the intermediate level configuration. So it might be there's a few business rules that are needed, or maybe a form element to it, and you may even need some data as part of that. And again, I've got an example of that we'll go through in a short while. And the final one is run, and that's where we're starting to push the system a little bit more, show a lot more of the flexibility that you can do with an SMAX. So we're talking more complex configurations. It might be things we do via integrations. My example today, it's not. It's all within the tool. And obviously, with anything where it's a bit more complex, you're going to need to have a think about how that works within your environment. Okay, and it may need some more time to configure, and maybe even do some testing about other configuration that you've done within your system to date. Okay, so let's do the first one. So this is reset a task plan. So again, these are all going to be about service request, because that's the topic for today. So let's look at the use case. So the use case for this one is a service request hasn't been completed correctly. So for whatever reason, the service request has gone through its life cycle. It's gone back to the user to accept that request. But in this case, the user decided to reject it. So they're rejecting the resolution of that ticket. An agent would review and confirm, and because in this particular case, the whole task plan needs to be rerun. They need to obviously reset that task plan as part of going back through the fulfill cycle of that request. Okay, so I've done a little video to show that in action. So hopefully it should run quite nicely now. So here I am in my SMAX system. I'm currently looking at a service request. User's obviously got one which is about headset. We see in the workflow we're in the user acceptance phase, so we're waiting on the user to accept what's needed, and we can see that there's a number of tasks that were set up as part of that as part of that offering, and that service request, and they've all been marked as completed. So it looks like they're all been done successfully. So let's jump across to the end user and see what they want to do. So we're in the self-service portal. Obviously they'll have had an email notification, but they can also see from their to-do list they've got this ticket to accept or reject. So we'll go into the ticket and we'll put a bit of an update on here. So if we look at the solution that was provided, apparently the headset was delivered to the customer. I haven't had a headset. In fact, I could do with a new one. So we're going to reject it in this case to say it's not been delivered. I'm going to mark it as rejected. Okay, so if we jump back now to the agent side, obviously we're having to flip between different screens and users for this, and there would obviously be a bit more of a time delay in this situation. But if we go back to the general tab, we can see that we've moved across on the workflow. So we've now moved to that review phase, okay? Because as we said before, the users rejected the solution, and we can see the comment that the users made on that ticket. So as an agent, I'm going to move it back to the fulfill phase. Now, normally out of the box, what would happen when I do that is the task plan wouldn't change; it'd still be in the same process, and I would probably manually have to recreate the tasks for that workflow. However, with our configuration we've done in this instance, we've gone back to fulfill, and we've reset the task plan. So we've actually gone back up to the start for it to go through and be reprogressed and create new tasks associated with this to hopefully deliver the user's headset in the correct manner. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, really quite simply. So go to Administration Records, Processes and Rules for the request record. Then we'd click on Request, so we could see the high-level workflow for service requests. Highlight the transition, and then we'd add a new rule in. So it's just a very simple, straightforward reset a task plan and choosing the task plan fulfill during that transition. And that's it. And that allows us to reset the task plan irrespective of which different type of service request offering that's there. Now, if we think about that in the real world, obviously what that means is for some customers that might work, but actually for others, we might need to look at how that's built out. Maybe there's certain types of requests where we don't want to reset the task plan. Maybe there's a need where there's the validation done by the agent during the review phase before that's run. But the idea is a very simple workflow configuration that could be applied that you can then potentially use to fit with how you want to work in your organization. Okay, so that's cool. Let's go to walk. And this time we're going to do about managing the flow of general support requests. So as we mentioned earlier on, we have a general support request is raised from the end user portal if they don't select a particular offering. Well, that's great, but in an organisation where they only have one service desk, that's not too bad because that ticket would automatically get assigned to the service desk for them to do it. But what about if you're in an organisation where there's multiple service desks? Maybe in a very simplistic, what I've done here is about IT and HR, but it could be that there's other service desks involved throughout the business based on a lot of other different criteria around when a ticket gets raised. So rather than forcing them maybe having a general HR request or a general IT request that they have to raise, we simplify the end user experience, okay, and we try and make this nice and easy for the users so when they hit that general support request, they're given an option to help us with the flow of where that record's going to go. So again, we've got a little video, so let's run through the video and see how it goes. So in this case, I'm at the end user portal. I'm a user, and I think I'm going to use the virtual agent to raise my issue. So I'm going to type in my issue. I'm going to put about the fact that I'm having Outlook issues, and I'm going to post that. It's come back with a couple of options, but in this case, and obviously for this use case, I'm just going to create a standard support request. We get to our almost done, and obviously I can continue to work, but we've got this extra option. There's actually a user option that's mandatory for me to fill in to say whether it's an IT or a HR request. In this case, I'm going to say it's an IT request. I'll get that ticket created. If we go across to the agent side and we refresh our view, we can see that general support request has come through, and it's assigned to the service desk. So, and that's obviously the IT service desk that's going to manage that ticket. That's great. So let's repeat that this time, but in this case, we're going to say that it's a HR issue. Because always the way, I think payroll is always one of those things that HR tend to get involved in, and hopefully if my manager's on the call, I may be able to get a pay rise. But from this point of view, we're going to raise it as a HR issue and submit the request. Okay, we've got our ID, gone through exactly the same process, just shows them one different option. And if we refresh the queue and look at it from here, we can see in this instance, it's gone to a different assignment group. It's gone through to the customer service desk, which looks after the HR requests. And keeping it nice and simple and easy for that end user. So again, how do we do that? So a few more extra steps involved with this one, not too many. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create a support request offering in a catalog. Now we'll talk about more on the catalog in the next session that we do, but what we're going to do is create that. We're going to make it the default offering. So if we set it as a default offering, that means that when someone doesn't select an offering, it will attempt to utilize that one. We'll also then add our user option that we created, so the simple IT or HR request. And we'll make that a mandatory field as well. It's got to be populated by the user. So they've got to create that, they've got to populate that when they're submitting a request. We then need to create a couple of rules for the overall assignment. So these are actually on the offering themselves. So it can be managed by the service catalog administration team, not by the tenant admin. The rules I've put in are a little bit more complicated, purely just because based on the use case that I was doing. But if we look at those rules, pretty much all we're saying is if they're selecting IT, we pass it to the service desk, and if we and in the instance where they select HR, we pass it to the other service desk group. Okay, and even though I selected from a drop-down list in the business rule, obviously when you're showing it in this case, it shows the hard ID numbers of those tickets. You can see that they're different. Now the extra step that we need to do is we need to go into the feature settings of the self-service portal. Scroll down to the virtual agent section and basically say that an offering is mandatory. Out of the box, I think the default value is optional, so it doesn't force an offering to be utilised. But by setting it as mandatory, it means that default one that we've picked gets automatically applied every time if they haven't ordered something from the catalogue. And then that allows that process to run and work through in that case. Now, this particular example that I've done is actually from one of our existing customers. Slightly different with them, what they did, where we extended it beyond this, is we also use data domains. So their IT and their HR use the same tenant, but they have a data segregation between IT and HR. So IT can't see HR tickets, and HR can't see IT tickets. And by doing this, we kept it nice and simple from the end user. They just go to one portal, see one ticket type and just say whether it's an IT or a HR issue, and based on that, then it gets sent to the right team. And the good news there is it means that if it is something that's maybe a little bit more confidential in the request that they're raising, it's not going to go to the wrong team, it's going to go to the right team, and only the relevant people are going to be able to see that ticket. And again, there's lots of ways that you could extend that. You could utilise that for inbound email or various other options as well. So hopefully it'll give you a good option going forward. Okay, so our final use case that we're going to do is a little bit more complicated. And this is it's about adding a new user from live support. So I'm just going to step this one through and explain it a little bit. So again, this is one that I worked with on one of our customers in the UK. They had a use case whereby it was mainly their HR desk would get people phone the service desk who aren't registered in SMAX, and as we know, with the way the tool is designed, you need a person. If you're going to raise a request against someone, you need a person record in the tool to raise it against. Now, when we talked it through and we just discussed it, one option that came up was having a generic user that they raise those requests for. But given in the HR world and the non-IT world, you could have quite a lot of users phone up over a week, especially in a larger company. That's really not going to be useful. And likewise, actually, it may be that you might want to contact them over email as well. So you want to be able to capture a bit of extra information. So what we built with this configuration was we basically said, right, from within live support, we'll allow them to record some details about the person that's phoning and allocate the request to that person. And how do we do that? Well, we create the person record in the background of the save of that request record. So let's run a little video because that probably explains it and shows it a lot better than I can actually explain it. Okay, so as a service desk agent, I'm sitting here at live support, ready and raring to go, and someone phones me up, and it's David that phones me up, and I obviously do a quick search to see if he exists in the person system, and he doesn't. So I'm going to use our special add new user. Now, as you can see, the form has altered slightly, and we've got a couple of mandatory fields to fill in for that user. In this case, we obviously want a name, so we're going to put David's name in, and we need to put an email address in as well. Now, if we think about this, this is partially so we can create that user in the system, because we need obviously their email details when we create a person record. We populate those fields. Now we can raise a request just like it's anything else. And in fact, although in this case I'm doing it very simplistically about user not being able to log into the system, you can still utilize all the offerings that are available within your service catalog. You're not tied down to a specific offering for that user. So we've copied those in. Now, as you can see, the requested by and requested for is set to add new user at this point, because that's the user that we're creating. But if we save the record, what happens now is while that save's going on, we create that David's person record in the background, and then we set them as the requested for the ticket, which means that now, because we captured those details, we can potentially email, we can track all their tickets, and if they phone back, we've got them available from the live support drop-down list to choose for the next time they call, and we can see all their recent tickets that they've raised as well. And that's it. Quite a simple feature that we've added and functionality that we've added into the system. But how do we do that one? Well, this one's a little bit more complicated. There's a few extra steps in this one, so hopefully you can stick with me. First thing we need to do is we want to create a specific add new user contact record in the person table. Because we're using the person drop down to select that add new user, we need that to be available. In this case, obviously, create a little icon to make it more easier to identify from the list, and you've got that created. Then what we need to do is on the request record, we're going to need to create some additional fields that are available for us on the request record. Now, in the use case and the setup that I've done here, I've done it based on the fact that the user, we're allowing them to potentially choose any offering in the catalog. So that's why I've got my records against the request table. You could potentially do it as an offering, so maybe create an offering and have them as user options. It's an alternative way of doing it if you want to. I guess it comes down to what works within your organization. For this example, I just created two fields, user and email address. But again, that's just a form. You can have as many fields as you need or want to capture about that user and have that display on the live support page. So we've created the fields in the form. The next thing we need to do is we need to add those onto the live support form. So in this case, I'm going to the request forms and I'm updating the live support new request form, not the edit one, just the new one. So we only see it when we're creating a new record. And I'm going to add a new section at the top and put those fields that I've created as part of that section. Now, the reason for doing it as a section is actually that makes it easier from a business rule perspective for making it overall hidden when I'm not using the add new user. So the rule that we then create at point 4 there is to hide that section unless add new user is selected. Now in this case, for simplicity, I use the hard-coded ID of that add new user that I created. Of course, if you're doing things like dev to prod and moving configuration from a development environment to a production environment, data is going to potentially have different values. So that may have an implication with using a unique ID in that case. However, it might be that you've got full access rights as a tenant admin in your production environment to make changes. Obviously, it depends on your rights that you have. If you don't have the rights, you've got to go through a dev to prod process. What you could do is you could base it on the UPN or the user principal name of that user that you've created, because that's again a locked down field. It has to be unique for that particular user, so you can use that to hide that section on the form. Last 3 steps. So next we want to make those fields on the form mandatory. So again, I've done it using the ID, but we could do it against the user principal name and just straightforward mandatory rules for those particular fields. Then we want to create an after change rule. So this is what we're saying is after we've made a change to the record, and my if statement I've put there is that the email field has been populated and the name field has been populated. What we're going to do is we're going to create a new record. We're going to create a person record, and we're going to make a relationship with this request record at the same time. So we're going to treat them as a follower of that request record, and that's quite important, which will come to the final step. As part of that, we'll obviously then populate with that information against that person record. If you've got more fields, you can populate obviously more data on that person record if you make it available. One thing to be aware of with this use case is the simple fact that your request on behalf rules that you have in a system may have an impact on setting this up. So in an out-of-the-box system, request on behalf is locked down to members of your team or that you're the manager of. So in my setup, I set it so that when I created that user, the add new user was the manager of the new user I created. But if you've got different request on behalf rules, maybe anyone can request on anyone else, you won't need to include that in the system. But again, it gives you an idea that if someone's doing administration on the person records, it's a way they can slice the data and look at those user contacts that are created and look at how they need to potentially modify them going forward. Final step is literally as that record has been created, after adding that relationship, we then set the requested for to someone. Now, because we've related them as the follower and they're the only follower, that allows us to get at the ID and pass that straight to the requested for, allowing us to populate it straight away in that system. And that's it. Simple, he says. Okay, so we've gone through our configuration use cases. Hope you found them really useful. Let's go through our sort of final wrap-up on a few things. So guides and help. Obviously, we have the Application Help Center. That's the full help center that's similar to what Service Anyway users would have available to them. We also have our community forums, so our learn discussions and obviously our new idea exchange for where you might see some enhancements that you want to SMAX and promote those. We also have on the Learn site getting started in configuration guides. So some of what I've showed you today is actually taken from those. Really good guides, quite in depth. That it was something that someone from the technical success team did work on with some of our customers to help develop those. So really good information. The other thing I want to say at this point is if you've got some configuration use cases that you'd like to share, maybe we could run it for you, or maybe you'd like to present it. We're really interested. We want to be able to share amongst the community and make everyone aware. I'll say let's email Tonya on this one so that she can collate them and we can map them through. But those who know my details, which I said at the beginning, I'm happy to reach out to me and we'll help organise that going forward. And finally, that I've got on here was we would like to do a little survey if possible. Tonya, do you want me to hand back to you just to cover this off?
Sure. Thank you, Dean. Great content. And I did just put a link in the chat for feedback on this specific topic. So we have the regular posting that has all of the topics and recording links, but we're going to try this separate post just for today's recording, just a new series, get your feedback and questions. In terms of the survey here, so if you could just take a look at the questions and chat in your answers with the number and the letter. And you can do that all in one line, like 1A, 2B, 3A, or you can just send me an email with the answers and maybe additional feedback. So just want to understand if you're a customer, partner, and internal, your sort of expertise or experience level with SMAX or Service Anywhere in the past, your feedback on today's session. Do you feel like it was useful to help you achieve your goals? Would you recommend it? And if it is 3B, just let us know what kinds of things you're expecting. And then we are planning to do another one of these sessions in our meeting in 2 weeks. And Dean, I don't recall if we've picked the topic for that yet.
I've got it on the next slide actually, Tonya. So.
Oh, okay, good. I'll leave it at that. But then, yeah, let us know what else you'd like to hear about, whether it be a high-level application area like change management or a drill down into a particular capability.
Okay, so I'll just move forward on to our last slide.
Great.
So just to reiterate what we said about these sessions. So these sessions are running every 2 weeks. So the next one will be in 2 weeks' time, which we're looking to focus on service catalog. So extend out some of what we talked about, request management, and how we can work on offerings and how they work, and how we can utilize some of the features and functionality around that. After that, we've got some upcoming sessions. So Tonya, do you want to cover those off?
Yes, I do. So Feb 14th is the release readiness webinar for the 2018-02 release, or the February release, and we'll be sending some information probably in the next week or so with just a little bit more about that. Most of you are probably used to the release readiness webinars now, but we'll be doing one for SMAX, and we're actually going to do a separate one for SMA-SM this time around. So I'll send some information on that. Let's see if I can get the WebEx URL correct this time. And then 2 weeks later, we'll be going to another sort of best practice session, and we'll be doing some drill downs on REST APIs. And after that, well, we'll get your feedback and see what you would like to cover next. So, Dean, I think that is the last of your slides. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Well, that's the last one right there. So wonderful, just under the hour mark. So that's great. Thanks everybody for joining, and I'll be sending out the recording if you need to be sending it to your colleagues or peers, and that should be available by tomorrow. And Jean, thank you so much. Great content, and look forward to the feedback from everyone.
Yeah, me too. So it should be 3A from everyone, I hope.
Yeah. Thanks, Jean. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.